Awesome. Welcome everyone to this Learn Live session. Upgrade and migrate Windows Server IaaS virtual machines is the name of that. My name is Thomas Maurer. I'm a program manager at Microsoft in our Azure Edge and Platform team, focusing on a lot of our Azure Hybrid and Edge, and also obviously Azure Migrate scenarios. And I'm joined by Bert Wolters. Bert, how are you doing today?
Hi, man. I'm great. I'm Bert Wolters, and I'm coming to you from Amsterdam tonight. It's in the evening right now, and I'm talking to you about, well, the storage migration part later on. So Thomas will tell you how you can migrate VMs from on-premises into Azure. And afterwards, we're also going to discuss some fun things about storage.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good stuff in there today. So if you're dealing with Windows Server, upgrading on-premises or in Azure, or you want to migrate to Azure or migrate your service, all of that, there's a lot of facts and a lot of stuff in there for you today. But we are not alone. So we have a lot of help here. From some people here, from our moderators, and a big shout out to them. Without them, it would definitely not be possible to handle all that. And also shout out to all the production crew in the background helping us with this session. So really appreciate everyone here helping us out. So that's the good thing. And also, obviously, everyone who joins this session. So if you want to join this session, this is like an interactive experience. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft Learn, we have different Learn modules and learning paths, for example, where you can go through on your own time as well, and then basically go through that Learn module, test things, do some knowledge checks. Some of them even have some sandboxes where you can try out things. So again, if you want to follow us there directly on your PC as well, here is the link. You can also scan the QR code and then join us for this one as well. And then we will quickly go through the learning objectives in this session. So we'll obviously talk a little bit about Windows Server IaaS migration, especially with Azure Migrate and how you can move these to Azure. And we'll also have a look on a couple of other things, how you actually can do an in-place upgrade of operating systems and things like that. And then Bert, you already mentioned you're going to talk about storage migration stuff, and you're going to also show us some of these.
Yeah, sure. And just to be clear, right at the beginning, we're talking about storage migration from server to server, because I really want to emphasize that, because Microsoft also has a very cool service where you can move your storage from your storage server into a service in Azure. But we're not going to discuss that one yet. Today, we focus on server-to-server migrations.
Awesome. Awesome. This is fantastic. And then last but not least, we want to ask you really to keep this like interactive, because this is a live session. We're doing all of this live. So please, if you have any questions, use the chat to ask your questions, and we have our moderators looking at it to answer your questions. But also, if we see some questions or some questions come up to us, we'll also try to live answer them on the stream as well. But again, keep the questions coming. We always learn a lot as well when we have some questions. And before we actually go into the introduction, let me quickly reshare my screen here. I heard there's maybe something frozen, so let me quickly go back and basically reshare. So just give me a second here to do that.
Whoa, this is a very big picture of us. I was not prepared for this.
I apologize for everyone who was not prepared for this. But so let's dive into the Learn module. So if you checked out the link or the QR code, and you can always do that later on, the module is available 24/7 for you. You will basically land on this page, and you can actually have a look at a little bit of what is covered by this Learn module. You have a little bit of a summary. also there is maybe some like prerequisites of things you should know about, like which are helpful to know about. Again, you can still go through without knowing all this stuff, to be honest, but it's good to like be aware of these things as well. And so,
Thomas, when I've been stuck under a rock for the last months, and I'm looking at this list, and I'm saying to myself, but what is this Entra ID thing?
This is a fantastic question. Good eyes, by the way. So Microsoft Entra ID, I'm actually happy that we updated this already everywhere, it looks like. It's the new name of Azure AD. So if you used Azure Active Directory or using it, Microsoft Entra ID is basically the new name for it. We are very well at Microsoft to rename our stuff regularly. So this is the new name, but good eye, good catch. Absolutely, if you're not like familiar with that, this is basically Azure AD.
Oh,
fantastic. So let's talk migration here a little bit. Again, in the introduction part, we're usually going through like kind of like real world scenarios, right? We describe a real world scenario. In this case, it's about Contoso, who wants to migrate their workloads from 2012 R2 to Windows Server 2022. And they also want to migrate some of these workloads to Azure as well. So again, if you want to, especially if you go without us, without Bert and me through this, then I recommend going through this kind of like that you understand the scenario where you are at and so on. But let's get started and talk Azure Migrate, Bert. Should we talk a little bit about Azure Migrate and Azure migrations?
Yeah, that sounds good. But I read something just now. Windows Server 2012 R2? Really?
Yeah.
Is that still a thing?
Absolutely. Don't feel bad if you have Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2. Still, there are a lot of customers out there who still run these kind of versions, and obviously they're out of support right now. Bert, I'm sure are you working with customers as well, and you're also aware of customers having this. Sure. There's a great new option to get these extended security updates. You want to quickly talk about just mentioning how that works?
Yeah, I've heard of when you place it on Azure, you will have extended support, but there's now also a way to get your extended support in your own data center. When you run them on Azure Stack HCI, which is kind of a version of Azure running in your data center, then you're also eligible for that extended support. So still, it's wise if you want to move away from 2012 R2, because we have made progress since then. And in storage migration, I will tell you much more about that, something to do with the SMB service. But again, if you still have those holy grails running on your 2012 R2 servers, they can be supported by Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a great point. So if you're running Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, you're now basically out of support. So you have a couple of options, and as Bert mentioned, there's one with Azure. So the first one is you're going to buy extended security updates, and you can do that like you're probably familiar. You did that probably with earlier versions of Windows Server 2008. You can buy that from Microsoft. There's a cost involved, and then you will get some registry keys to basically enable the updates on these older systems. But as Bert said, if you migrate them to Azure, and that's what we're going to have a look at in just a bit, or on premises on Azure Stack HCI, you will get extended security updates for free, right? So that's already a big plus. And then we also offer now a way using Azure Arc, which allows you basically to with an agent which can be installed on the server itself. And then you can buy in the Azure portal, you can buy extended security updates for that specific server. And that enable that as well. So there's a couple of options for you there. But again, as Bert said, it's always wise to move to newer versions because, again, we are not going to support this for a very long time. Also, extended security updates are limited to a certain time period, right? So if you need some extra time to actually come from these versions, this is a great way. So let's talk about how you would actually go and migrate your servers to Azure, right? And again, this doesn't need to be because of extended security updates, but it can be. But we also have a lot of scenarios where you have different motivations to do that. One is, for example, data center exit strategies, right? Where people say, I want to close down my data center and migrate that to Azure as well. So there's a couple of things to dive into. So first of all, if you look at Azure Migrate, it's not just migration. It's also a great tool to actually do assessments of your environment. And meaning that it's not just about assessments in a technology way, that's also happening, but also in a cost way. And I'm going to show you that in just a bit, how you can do that. And it also covers a lot of other things, such as, for example, thinking about, okay, hey, you run databases, you run web apps on-prem. Why don't you use Azure PaaS services, platform as a service, like Azure SQL or web apps, where you don't need to take care about the server itself, because that's like service provided by Microsoft. And it's usually also cheaper to do that. So it also does basically assess this and say, hey, you can actually move that to a web app. And then, sorry, Bert, yeah, you have also some other comments on it?
No, I think you're doing a great job in explaining all these tools. But when I hear the Azure Migrate tool, it's like one thing, but it's like a Swiss Army knife already, right? It gives you all kinds of options for all kinds of different workloads.
Absolutely. As you can see here in the Learn module as well, there's a good description of what you can actually do, right? So we have, for example, the server assessment. We have the server migration scenario where you then actually migrate the servers. And again, we're going to have a look at that in just a bit. But then you can also do that for databases and web apps. And there's also something called data box. So if you have large amounts of data you need to move, and you only have a very small or low bandwidth internet connection, right? It can take forever to actually migrate that data to the cloud. So what you can do is you can use Azure Data Box, where we will send you or ship you a huge box, basically, like depending on what you need. We can also ship a small box, which is basically just a disk. But then if you have more, there's like a huge container, which is filled internally with disk, and you basically have ports to actually then copy the data on this, then basically ship it back, and it will be imported in our data center on a physical way, which is pretty cool as well. So there's also a little bit of information on how to use Azure Migrate. And if you're thinking about migration in general, there's a couple of different patterns here, right? So you can, for example, as it here describes, you can rehost your workloads, which means basically you take your VMs and you put it up into Azure. You just take how it is as it is and put it up in Azure. Or you can refactor them to make them work better on certain offerings. You can re-architect them, basically change the architecture of the application, or then basically do a complete rebuild of the application as well, right? And then rebuild it directly on Azure, for example. We also have customers who actually rehost their applications first in Azure, and then they start to modernize and rebuild their applications and re-architect them to actually then run on the PaaS service layer and microservices layer, for example, on Kubernetes, on our Kubernetes service. And by the way, this rehost scenario or pattern is also often described as lift and shift, right? So if I talk about lift and shift, that's also a big case. And again, I want to show a little bit more of the demo scenarios here, but again, there's a lot of description in this module, how these workloads can be moved.
So Thomas, for people who are actually working with these technologies and maybe thinking about moving their workloads into Azure, what would be your advice? To do a lift and shift first and then do a refactor, or?
It really, like, the answer for this is not an easy one. It really is a depend question, right?
Okay.
It really depends a little bit on where you are and what your motivations are on this cloud journey, right? If you do, for example, have a data center exit strategies where you're leases for the data center buildings are running out, or the hardware support is running out, and you don't have much time left to actually do that. I would recommend that you first migrate and buy yourself time, basically lift and shift, rehost it to Azure, then start modernizing it, right? This is like, for example, just one case where this makes sense. Now, in other cases where you don't have so much time pressure, you can take the time to actually redeploy, re-architect these solutions, which you run on-prem today, to run on Azure, and you have that time. So there's different scenarios. There is also, I mean, I also heard from customers that they basically do a lift and shift because they feel like, okay, this seems to be the easy part. And then we get some knowledge to work with the cloud and with Azure, right? We get some, like, even if we just run VMs at the beginning, we still get some knowledge on how Azure works and prepare everything. And there's a lot of things to unpack there. What do you see with customers? Like, what are, is there specific scenarios as well, or?
No, and I also think it depends on what software you're using and your software vendor. Are they already heavily involved in containerizing applications, for instance? But I do advise always make a plan, because you can run virtual machines in Azure in an economical, sensible way, but you'll need to take all things into account. When does the virtual machine need to run? Can I apply certain discounts, etc., etc.?
Yeah.
So again, first make a plan and then take the step.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let us go to the next one and actually show a little bit more about Azure Migrate itself. And I will promise you, I will switch in a demo really, really quickly. But one thing to mention, with every migration, there's some important things to do first, right? Before we actually do the technology part, before we actually start moving things around, we should probably do a proper planning and really think about what we are actually doing. And a lot of this comes with building a strategy and defining plans for doing this, and defining goals, and also making, like, checking out what are actually the motivations for us to do it. Like, when did we achieve our goal, and so on. And then also plan and prepare our Azure environment, right? So we not just want to move it up and have it just connected. I mean, for very small environments, that works. But if you do that properly, you also probably want to think about the landing zone where you put these workloads and how you build this up. So one thing I want to share with you very, very quickly here. If you are thinking about cloud migration, and even if you're already in your cloud journey ahead and you haven't heard about this, check out the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. You can find that link, I'm going to say it again, aka.ms/adopt. And that brings you to basically the Cloud Adoption Framework. And this is our, basically, I would say, the holy grail of like cloud strategies and migrations. So here you would basically get like different plans, again, all behind these patterns here. You have a lot of information on what you need to make sure you need to think of, right? Things, do I have identity in place? Do I have the networking part figured out? How do I operate this? How do I secure this? How do I make sure that things are securely backed up, and disaster recovery planning? There's a lot of things that you need to wrap your head around. And again, we give you all that in these patterns, right? So if you look at this, I like this graphic a lot, where we actually go and say, hey, first you define a strategy, you plan, you prepare your environment with getting ready, right? And again, this is not just about technology, it's also about your organization and your processes. And then you go into the adopt phase where you then say, okay, how do I get actually my applications there, right? Do I just run new applications? Do I migrate? And if, how do I migrate? And then on the bottom, you can see all these ongoing patterns, methodologies basically, to secure, manage, and govern. And they are basically running from the start of this, basically until you stop doing cloud, basically, which will probably never really happen. But this is like a really ongoing process then, right? And so Absolutely great. Check out the Cloud Adoption Framework. We also help you there to build your Azure environment, to set it up the right way for your organization. But going back to the to the learning modules, we obviously go through here how you actually go into the Azure migrate scenario and how to actually prepare this. This is all described here. But let me show you that directly in the Azure portal, right? Why not do a quick demo here? So if you want to get started with Azure Migrate, the easiest way is to go into the portal and hit Azure Migrate or search for it. And then the first thing you actually do is, you can see here on the bottom, you can go to like server, you have different workloads or migration goals here. So if you want to do servers and databases, that's what you have a look at today. But you can see here also database only, if I have VDI scenarios, web apps, Databox, and so on. And the first thing you do is you create a migration project. That is where all your stuff is going to be stored at, all the metadata, that's where you work in. And you can have multiple projects, like depending on if you have different parts of your organization you want to migrate, right, and so on. But a lot of like smaller companies probably will have one project at the beginning. And then you start with the assessment part, because the first thing I want to do is obviously discover what I have. So I already did some setups. That's why I already see here where you can see here some numbers already. But usually you would basically see 0 here, and then you would start with discover. Now discover asks you then a couple of things. You can then basically deploy a Azure Migrate appliance on premises. That will help you to assess your environment and figure out what servers are you running, and then also obviously help you with the migration and replication later on, but especially at the beginning to actually like discover your environment, right? What a lot of people don't know is you can also, if you cannot have that appliance running, you can also do that using a CSV. So we give you a template CSV, which you can download, and then you can fill in the data, and then you can upload this. And then we will help you to help with the assessment, right? That's obviously a little bit more work, to be honest, especially if you have lots of server. But that means you don't need to install something in your environment or like deploy that that appliance.
So when you say appliance, you mean like a virtual machine, right? You're not shipping a 1U thing for my rack.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, that's actually, when I speak about this appliance, that's a virtual machine that can run either on Hyper-V or on VMware, or it could also run even at other cloud providers or other hypervisors as well, right?
On VMware?
Yep, absolutely. We can also obviously not just migrate Hyper-V VMs, we can also migrate VMware vSphere environments as well. So in my case, I would say, okay, I want to do a Hyper-V assessment of my Hyper-V environment. I would then provide a name, and then I basically can download that appliance, and I would then basically import that as a virtual machine, and I can show you this in just a second. So this would then help me basically discover everything happening. So here I am on my Hyper-V server 01. You can see here, those are all my application servers, my file servers, my SQL database servers, and so on. They're all running nicely here. On my second Hyper-V server, and again, I did this only, by the way, to save some space, but I could run on the same hypervisor, Hyper-V box as well. If you only have one Hyper-V server, you could also run it there. But I already imported the appliance here. And the first thing you need to run through is you need to basically set up that appliance, which is basically just going through this web page. There's a local web page on that appliance, which you go through and you log into Azure. You provide some credentials for your environment, because basically needs to go to your Hyper-V server or VMware vSphere environment if you run VMware. And then you can basically add the hosts here and say what Hyper-V host I want to assess. And give some additional credentials. And that's all it is, basically what you need to do locally to go into the assessment, right? So if I go out of this, after a while then, it will basically show up and say, hey, I discovered some servers here. So in this case, I found 12 servers on my Hyper-V server. And it says, okay, there are a couple of Windows and Linux maybe, and some unknown ones, operating systems we don't know. And now I can do a couple of things. I can do a business case. I can start a full assessment of doing that. So if I go into the overview, this is actually for me the best view to actually see what's going on. The first thing I might want to do is create a business case, right? So you could just go through and say, hey, I want to build a business case here. You would provide a name. You would say, okay, what location do I want to migrate to? What is your migration approach, right? So usually the recommended approach is a good one because it says, okay, this could actually be run as a database in Azure on Azure SQL. Doesn't need to be a VM, but again, if you only want to do VMs, you can also select that. And then you can also add some saving options. So we have options like reserved instances, where you, for example, commit to basically run a VM for a year or 3 years, and then you get a big discount on these. And then you have some other discount values you can enter, and then you can start building the business case. And after you have created that one, I created one here called My Application Year 1. You can have a look at this, and you basically get some calculations here on what your savings will be when you actually migrate to Azure. It does also add some discounts here on licenses and so on, everything you get there. You can also dive into that report a little bit more deeply and see on like an example, like how does that compare from on-premises to Azure. It also focuses obviously on like operational costs. It does some assumptions here, and you can see here for the assumption part, you can then basically go out and also edit these to your actual numbers, right? Obviously, we do some assumptions here, but if you have different pricing, licensing, you have different operational costs and so on, you can actually enter these numbers or edit these numbers, and then basically that will be shown in that report. And you can also, by the way, export that report to a spreadsheet, for example, that you can actually show it and create a nice presentation for your boss to say, hey, this is the reason why we should actually move to Azure. Good. The next part is you can obviously group your systems. You can check out your appliances, but I also want to show on the technical part, I also obviously want to know, can I actually migrate these servers to Azure? Does it actually work? And again, how much does it cost for each of the servers? So you would create a new assessment. And again, you can assess your environments for different purposes here. You can say, I want to migrate to Azure VMs, Azure SQL, web apps. Or if you want to keep on using VMware, for example, you can also say, I want to run VMware in Azure with Azure VMware Solutions and also migrate to this, right? Basically, I'm not going to show you how you create this assessment. But if you created one, which I did already before, you can see here, you get a number. You can see here your Azure readiness. You get some monthly cost estimation. You can see here you're breaking down to storage cost, to licenses and so on. And if you go to the details here, you will see here what we actually looked at. You will find all the servers here in this, and you can say, okay, hey, this one looks all green, so that's good. But if there's something which we don't support in Azure, for example, it will say, hey, this machine could not be migrated to Azure, or only if you do this, we need to make some small tweaks to it. However, in most cases today, I think everything should be green. There are not many reasons I can think of today. Bert, do you know anything of like which just would show up right now as
not fitted for Azure?
Yeah.
No, I rarely see that, especially when you've nicely patched everything up to date. Mostly greens.
Yeah, I think I remember like back in the days, there were generation 2 VMs not supported in Azure. So when you had on Hyper-V, for example, you had generation 2 VMs, it would say, well, we don't support that in Azure, but we will convert it to a generation 1 VM. Now, these days, since a pretty long time already, we support generation 2 VMs. There were also some limitations at the beginning with disk sizes and things like that. I think they're also mostly gone. But again, if you have, or maybe like VMs which have direct fiber storage attached, that might be something which could show up as not ready, where you probably need to think how you're going to do this. But again, it will help you actually to find out if these VMs actually work, right? And again, you can also figure out more in the cost details, so you can actually see what does the VM cost if I run it on Azure, and you can also see that it selects different direct VM sizes, which it recommends. So, by the way, these VM sizes, when you create an assessment, you can say, I want to just take the same sizes as I have on-prem, or you can take performance-based data. And that's fantastic. I like that one specifically, because if you let that assessment run over a larger period of time, let's say you do that for a couple of weeks, for example, it will check, hey, how much performance does that server need? How much memory does that server need? How much CPU power it actually uses? And if your VM is oversized or undersized, it will actually detect that and recommend you the right size for that VM, right? So actually you can really figure out, and the longer you let this run, this assessment part, the better that data obviously gets, right, over time.
Yeah. I have one suggestion there. Please consult your software vendor, because software vendors have these strict regulations where your machine should comply to, in terms of memory, in terms of processing power. And if this assessment says, no, you can do a little bit less, and your software vendor will say, yes, but we will not support you, then you've got a whole other issue.
Yep, absolutely. A good point. Also with software vendors, you're absolutely right. I mean, we just look at it from a technical perspective, right? But if you run an application from a software vendor which doesn't support hyperscalers such as Azure, for example, then, well, it's an unsupported scenario, right? We cannot detect that, but like if just the software vendor says this, you need to probably really talk with your software vendor to figure out, hey, is this okay? I mean, most of the application, I don't see a problem running in Azure, but I've seen some strange things, like especially when it comes, for example, to licensing based on MAC addresses and things like that, which is a weird thing to do in the cloud. And so there's some parts where you need to like figure out, okay, can I actually move this, right, from that side? And then there's also some contractual sides as well. So, okay, let's say we did this assessment. We are pretty happy. We know now that our application, we want to actually go and start the migration process, right? In this case, I would also go and set this up. So I already did this, but I would hit the Discover button. It will again ask me, because I can have multiple ones, it will ask me if this is for Hyper-V or for vSphere. So if I select Hyper-V, it basically just tells me, well, to migrate now, you need to prepare your Azure host, your Hyper-V host. I mean, not my Azure hosts, but my Hyper-V host for Azure migration. And basically, it's a very simple agent which needs to be installed. If I select vSphere, again, there are a couple of options. You can even do agentless replication, and it will tell you how that actually works. So because I don't have an appliance already deployed, it will tell me you need to download an appliance first. But then it also will say, hey, if I do a lot of migrations, I probably want to have multiple appliances here to actually do that. And then you can go through this and scale this out. So if you want to migrate hundreds and thousands of virtual machines as fast as possible, you probably want to scale this out with more appliances here as well. And then you start basically the replication process. So what you will say is, okay, I want to now replicate my virtual machines. I will basically say, okay, I want to do this. I want to replicate them to Azure VMs. And then I start a replication scenario. So it asks me from where do you want to replicate? Again, in our case, in this demo, we're going to select Hyper-V. And then it asks me, hey, do you want to use an assessment you did before? Or you just want to set it up completely manually? So if I do assessment, I can then select my server group. I did that for application 1. I did an assessment for application 1. And then you can see here, these are the two servers which are in application 1. So I would say, let's select these two servers to be replicated. I then need to set up the target environment. So in which Azure subscriptions do I want to replicate? I can say, hey, because they also run SQL, I can install the SQL extension to better manage SQL if it runs in Azure. And then there's a couple of other things like I need to obviously select the virtual network it should be part of with the subnet. We have some availability options in this case because I don't need availability in this case for this specifically. So I say no. And then I go to next. It will tell me what compute do you want to use. So in my case, I'm going to use these two sizes, right? That's the size which is selected, and it's recommended from the assessment. Now, however, I want to change this. I can still do that, right? If I want to choose another size, that's fine too. Oh, should select that. Okay. And then I would basically go and I can also change the disks which would be used. Again, it uses the recommended disk from the assessment. Now, in this case, it says there's not much going on in your environment, Thomas. So we give you standard HDDs, and you can go forward. And then you can use tags as we do in Azure. And at the end, basically gives you a summary, and you would hit replicate. And the replication process would then start in a couple of minutes. Make sure, obviously, you think about your bandwidth and stuff like that. You can also set this up and configure that. But just to be aware of. So let's say the application started, the replication started. I would then go in this overview and I can actually see I have two machines replicating, right? They're already good. If they would still be in replication for initial replication, it would be in there. But they are now constantly sending the changes to Azure, right? Constantly. So now what I can do is I can, for example, look at these machines. So I have, for example, my app01 server here, and you can see here I could now hit two things. I could do obviously migrate. That point, it will ask me, do you want to shut down the real VM? It will replicate the latest changes so you don't have any data loss. And then it will basically start up the VM in Azure, which takes a couple of minutes, and you're basically done with your migration. Another great scenario is test migration. So obviously, I don't necessarily want to pray that it actually just works, right? I probably want to test it and see, hey, does it actually work if I now do that application? But I want to set it up in a different virtual network. I want to completely separate. I want to clean it up afterwards. It just should not obviously be any problem to the production environment. So I can do a test migration here. And then I can select a different virtual network. So I created this test migration VNet. And then basically I could just hit test migration. Now, one thing I just realized, which is pretty cool, which I haven't seen in earlier versions, is this here, version upgrade. So if that server now, for example, runs an older version of Windows Server, let's say this one runs Windows Server 2016, and I want to migrate to Azure, I can tell it to say, okay, also directly, when it's migrated to Azure, I want to upgrade in place that server machine to 2022, which is totally awesome, I think. Again, keep in mind, there's a couple of other things to consider when you do upgrades of machines. But again, it's awesome that you can do that. And I personally believe that you can do that for a lot of different machines. However, again, check also that it works with your applications. But since you're doing this in test migration, there's nothing bad which can happen, right? Like if it fails, if it doesn't go the right way, you would just clean it up afterwards. And so that's a pretty cool scenario. For those people, for example, who already migrated their servers a long time, in-place upgrades of Azure virtual machines for Windows Server are not supported. I think since I don't know, half a year, we support that right now. So you can now also in-place upgrade existing Azure VMs. So just keep that in mind as well. So yeah, that is a quick demo of Azure Migrate. And I want to move back here to the module. And you can see here, this module really goes through the whole scenario and does it step by step, how you set this up and how you can do this. So this is a great way of actually migrating your servers or applications to Azure. So now I talked a lot, and I want to give Bert the word, basically, to actually talk about the storage migration piece of that module.
Thank you very much. So let's see, where are we in the module now, right? So we migrated our servers from on-prem to Azure. But that's only one thing. You're migrating the entire server. What if there was a way where you could just migrate your storage workload? So no servers moving around, just your storage. Well, we do have that service, and that is called the storage migration service. Now, you see here in our little description here that the Contoso company wants to see how they can migrate their storage. And for that, we have an on-premises service called the storage migration service. Just to check, Thomas, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, I see your screen.
Ah, nice.
Oh, yeah, you cannot see. Yeah.
No,
I see.
I can't see it. So the storage migration service is something running on a server. And I know that's kind of contradictory to the term you see behind me, Azure Man. I'm going to talk about something on a server, not a service. So when I was younger and I was visiting these conferences like Ignite, and I would see people doing all kinds of demos on stage, I was looking at the presenters like they were a couple of magicians, right? How do they do this? So before I start to show you all the moving parts, I really want to make sure that you know what I've set up here. And I don't have a fancy hat like Thomas has or a high hat, but I want you to see the rabbit inside the hat before I begin. So what I have here are a couple of virtual machines. You see here my trusted friend Hyper-V Manager, and I have 4 virtual machines here. I've got a domain controller, I've got a couple of file servers, and I've got something called an orchestrator. The orchestrator comes from the part that you need something to run Windows Admin Center on. Now, if you're having a small shop and you're migrating to a server that's running Server 2022, that's okay. You can just install Windows Admin Center on that server and migrate your storage towards you. Now, if you're a little bit larger like an enterprise, you might want to have a more solid solution. And that's when Microsoft recommends a separate server as an orchestrator server. So that's something outside of your actual storage environment, just coordinating all the actions between the different nodes. Now, if people have been paying real attention, they see 4 machines here in my Hyper-V overview. And here in my Windows Admin Center, they see 5. Well, that's because one of the 5 machines, you might have guessed it by the name, is outside of my Hyper-V server. It is actually in Azure.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it really doesn't matter where your server is as long as you have connectivity, and it should be part of the domain. The source server can be part of the forest, but the target server, so where you're migrating towards, should be in the same domain. So for everything to go right, I will just start up my domain controller again, because I see it's been turned off. And I do require some form of Kerberos authentication, because we're still working here on servers. Now, how does this storage migration server works? Well, on the source machine, which is my file server old, let me grab that one for you. And this is really, really old, right? I'm not sure, but it's not like a prize question, but for people attending the session and chatting, can anyone guess the operating system here?
2012.
R2. R2. I went for safe. I went for safe 2012 R2. It's like the old thing. I know it's going to work, but it's really an old animal there, right? Mm-hmm. So that is my old file server. Now, as I said, I'm working in a decent enterprise, so I've chosen to create this orchestrator node. And when I connect to my orchestrator node, I can scroll down in this Windows Admin Center. And I see something called the Storage Migration Service. When I select this, I know it's not Azure, it's not the fancy screen Thomas was working with Azure Migrate, but I do get 3 solid steps in my overview. And this is basically all you need to know. First, we assess. Hey, that is kind of the same like with Azure Migrate. Then we transfer data. You could say we synchronize data. And 3, we cut over to the new servers. And that sounds spooky. And you know what? It is spooky. Because what we can do here in one step is rename your server, and if you want, even re-IP your server. Now, you know what Spider-Man's granddad said to Peter Parker? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
This step requires planning.
But on the other hand, I mean, it's super easy then and super fast to actually do the cut over, right? There's almost, I guess, no interruption into the service itself for like, if people are using this, there's maybe a short downtime, but very, very quickly you can actually replace that file server.
Yeah, it takes a little bit like a ping. You miss one ping on the cutover.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So as we've done and saw with Thomas, we're going to create a new migration job. And this time, we're not doing a whole VM, we're just doing the storage. So of course, as you're aware, everything in Azure you want to spin up needs a name. Welcome to the cloud world in your own data center. We need a name.
So just to be very clear here, Bert, all the things you do, you show obviously as you showed a little bit with Azure, but if I'm not using Azure at all, I can still use this completely on-prem without having any Azure,
Perfectly
right?
fine. Yes.
Awesome.
No Azure required. Now, if you have a NetApp FAS array, you can use this. If you have Linux servers, you can use this. I went the easy way. I'm doing the Windows Server. So no cluster. This time, it works with clusters. And I will show you where we can see that it works with clusters. But now, for now, migration job 01, I'm not really that inspired anymore. I maybe should have called it Peter Parker or something. Of course, you see a whole list of prerequisites. We can migrate to anything 2012 R2 or later. We also see what we should run. Latest version is best practice. Next up, we're going to inventory our old file server. And we'll need a username and password. Okay. I can give you that. And again, just going with the bare defaults just to see that it's running. So administrator, my super duper password. And I don't want to include administrative shares. And I'm not going to migrate from failover clusters. If I would allow this, what it would do in the next step, it would install the failover clustering management tools. But for now, and for the sake of speed, let's not do that. Install required tools We don't need anything. And now we're going to scan the device. I want to first add a device. I'm going to search in Active Directory. And guys, Microsoft really did it. We can use wildcards. So I know it's FS, file server something, search. There we go. File server old. I'll add it. And then.
Nice.
I see my entire configuration when I'm going to scan this. So now I've defined where I think my source files are. Now I can start the scan. Let me see if this kind of clarifies things for the people at home. Now,
yeah, that makes
in these couple of minutes, it's finding all kinds of sized storages on my file server. All company, app backup, consultancy. This kind of looks like a company, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. I tried to make something out of it. And you see, this is not really enterprisey, but hey, it's solid, right? This was phase one. We've assessed our file server. We see the workload. We see the data we have. Next is transfer of data.
Okay.
Okay, sounds okay. So in the transfer of data, we want to define where we want to bring our data towards. And the steps are mostly the same. We need credentials for the destination devices. And luckily, we're working inside a domain. So here we go. What was it? Ignite, administrator, super secret password. No, it isn't password. Here we go. We want to specify the destination for everything we want to move from this thing.
Yeah.
Couple of cool things. We can choose, we don't want to transfer files. We just make like a special move, but we don't want to do anything right now. We can use an existing server or in the same flow, create a new VM in Azure.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that would create, okay, cool.
That's cool. For now, I don't have that time, man. So again, fs star search. And just for the sake of on-premises, I will do it to my file server new. I will add that to the destination. I will scan it. Why do we scan it? Because we want to see, is there somewhere like a volume where we can bring all that data to? So our source volume is an Ignite drive. And we're going to bring our stuff to the S, because I know that we have plenty of space there. Now, the next step is to select the shares to transfer. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't care much for all company, consultancy. No, not interested. Management, no. Production. I want to move super secret. Super secret sounds like I want to really migrate that to another server.
But again, you could just include all of these as well,
yeah,
right?
I could do. Yeah, if our session was going on for hours and hours, I would happily migrate everything. We have our transfer settings. We can overwrite checks. We can disable checks. We can specify how many retries we want to do. Not interested. I like the default. Required features. I don't really need any features because I already made sure in advance that I set up my SMS proxy, my data transfer proxy. I'm going to validate my device. And what it's now doing is some standard checks. Does the destination exist? SMB connection work? source files match, and next is the transfer. Start. It's now transferring data live as we're looking at it. So it's now spinning up. It's doing its work. We can look at some details down here, and then we see it's succeeded already. So it's done. Last step is to cut over to the new servers, and this is the thing where I said, be gentle, have a plan. Because in this stage, we can really change the IP addresses of the new servers to the IP address of the old servers. Now, why am I hammering so much on being careful with this step? Well, you already saw that I had one of the virtual machines running in Azure.
Mm-hmm.
In Azure, I will most likely have another IP range.
Yeah.
So that's something you want to be super careful with. Now, I know people back at home are really wanting me to show the file server new and really show them
that it actually copied something.
That it actually worked, right?
Yeah.
So I go here in my file server new. I will go into this PC, see my corp data, my S drive. I see my file services folder.
Yeah.
Super secret.
Okay.
Do not look. Should we look?
We should look.
This is not pretty. But you wanted me to look, right? The biggest secret on the web. There we go.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. I like that. Yeah. Not so sure if it's a secret, but yeah,
no,
perfect.
No.
You migrated that one file and these folders very, very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, you survived. You survived. So that, in a nutshell, was what is written on these pages in the Learn document.
Awesome. Fantastic, Bert. So let me quickly switch back. We don't have much time left, but we will do something here. We quickly switch to the knowledge check. At the end of the module, you can go through and actually check this. And so let's see if everyone paid attention to. So Diara is attempting to migrate on-premises workload from the Contoso London data center. She adds Azure Migrate to Contoso's Azure subscription. What is her next step? Diara now needs to run Discover to locate her own premises and server workloads. Diara now needs to add the Azure Migrate Server Assessment Tool, or Diara now needs to add Azure Migrate Server Migration Tool. So if you paid close attention, and again, maybe I went a little bit fast there, but first, obviously, we did one process. And again, for everyone, you can scan the QR code, or you can basically go to that URL and basically enter the following answer. So we see some answers coming in. That's awesome. Perfect. So let's have a look. And before you actually can do the discover part, you need to first start with the assessment tool. That's the first part you need to do. So awesome. A lot of people got it right. I think most of the people got it right. So let's quickly switch to the second question here. Mirana has been taken with migrating on-premises workloads to Azure. She is working in Contoso's data center in London on a workstation with Windows Admin Center installed. She has created a new migration job, added a list of servers. She is to migrate and perform device inventory on the transfer data page of the migration tool. That's what Bert shows. She prompted to enter credentials. Which credentials should she enter? A, Marina should enter the administrator credential for the workstation where she is working on. B, Marina should enter the administrator credentials for the servers she is migrating to. Or C, Marina should enter the administrator credential for the server she is migrating from. So let's see what people say here. I think that was what you were showing, Bert, right? That's exactly.
Yeah, true. So she created a new migration job. Well, I think she does that on a workstation. So I kind of assume that she's logged into the system.
Yeah. So I think we should say for B. And then last but not least, because most of our attendees goes right. And in terms of time, we go to the last question here. Julia is in the migration planning team at Contoso. She has been tasked with investigating which workloads should be migrated to Azure. She has discovered that there are a number of apps that must be migrated quickly and that requires no modification. Which of the following migration patterns does she suggest? So we talked at this very early on when we started. So for people who joined late, you probably missed that part. But we talked about the different patterns here: A, re-architect; B, rebuild; or C, rehost. So again, we can see here people voting for that. So we see some answers coming in. Awesome. And I think again, most.
How are they doing?
They're doing very well. So most people get it right. I think we are now at around 80% of people who actually chose the right answer. And so let us go and see. It's actually rehost. That means really
we have the best audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you want to migrate really, really quickly and don't do much changes, just taking the application and put it to Azure is called rehost, or also in many cases lift and shift, right? So that is sometimes also referred to as well. So a quick summary: we described Windows Server IaaS migration and explained how Azure Migrate works. And then Bert.
Yeah, I described storage migration, how that works, how you take data in huge piles and send them to another server, which can be done with Windows Admin Center and the storage migration service.
Awesome. And then again, there are some resources out there which you can check out to learn more. So I recommend you use that aka.ms link, or you can scan that QR code. I will keep this up for a moment. We also want to say thank you very much to everyone who asked a question. There were a lot of questions coming in, and our moderators did a fantastic job addressing these, sending out links with more information to this. So there was some fantastic scenes going in the background. I really see a ton of questions. So absolutely thank you, everyone, for that. And again, if you want to go through that Learn module by yourself, and you just didn't see the screen at the beginning, you can actually use your favorite search engine, Bing, to look for upgrade and migrate Windows Server IaaS virtual machines. Or you can use the following link or scan that QR code, and you will have time to go through that a little bit in your own time, try it out yourself, and see how it's going, and find out some more details than I and Bert had time, or Bert and I had time to actually share. So yeah, check that out. And with that, I also want to say, don't miss one of our next Learn Live sessions. Create bots with Copilot in Power Virtual Agents. Make sure you check that out. There's a great other Learn Live session going on here at Ignite. And with that, I also want to say big thank you to you, Bert, for it was a lot of fun, a lot of great information here. There's much more to migration than we showed today. There's much more going on that side. So please check out the links we actually put into the documentation and the Learn module. There's a lot of more information how this goes. So with that, I also want to say thank you to everyone joining us today. And again, thank you to the producers and our moderators here in the chat for the fantastic job.